Good morning and welcome to Good Body, Good Brain podcast. We are broadcasting today on a Sunday, and it's a glorious day in Texas. However, I know it's not so glorious in other places. California, we're praying for you. And all those who had snow in Houston, and thank God it's gone. Today we have a wonderful guest, Suzanne Jabour. That sounds very elegant. I like saying that. And we're going to talk about something that might be a little controversial. Our theme today is grief is the answer. And so I really welcome you, Suzanne, today. You have so much knowledge to show us and talk with us about. So here you are. Here is Suzanne.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm so grateful to hosts that are prepared to open their podcast up to this kind of a topic, which so many of us are scared to talk about. We don't want to know what's happening. We just want it all to go away. And unfortunately, grief doesn't go away. And so that's why, when you said, what should the theme be? I thought, no, it really is like grief is the answer. How do we show our team members that we care about them deeply? We show up when they're in grief. How do we build connections with other people in this time of the loneliness epidemic? We show up in grief. Why are we lashing out at each other so much from fear? Because we're in so much grief, like really in so many ways. To almost every question, grief is the answer. And unfortunately, because grief is also taboo and we all have a lot of ignorance and judgment about it, we aren't comfortable even having the conversations. And really, that's where we need to start, is how do we understand it better so that we can show up differently to people who really, really need us and need us to show up in a way that allows them to be seen and heard and supported. So that's why grief is the answer.
And this is so important too, because everyone has their grief menu. Like, how do I grieve? What's going to happen? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But some people like to be approached very differently than other people. So our understanding of them is very, very important. For an example that's very sad is the story of a grandmother who was at work and had a ring link, and she realized that her daughter was screaming. Her daughter's grown. Her daughter was screaming because she had found her 2-year-old kid in the swimming pool, not breathing. Now, the person observing this is a nurse. She's 10 miles away. She knows she can't get there. Fortunately, EMS was about 2 minutes away.
Wow.
They came and they worked for 2 hours. By the time she got home, the work was over.
Yeah.
And so when this lovely, lovely, so dedicated to this child person went back to work, after about 3 weeks, she had a very important job. She had all these people coming up to her. And she just wanted them to leave her alone.
Yeah.
So some people want that and some people don't. And knowing your person is vital.
Yeah. And just asking really gentle questions. As an employer, how powerful would it have been for someone, her direct report or someone she trusted, to say to her, you're going to be back on Monday. Do you want everyone to come and say something? Or do you want to just be here as a worker and not as a griever? And you can change your mind at any time, right? But so often what I hear from grievers is, yes, they get back to work and they're bombarded with people all at once wanting to, give their condolences, which we don't even really know how to do in a way that's helpful. And then everyone feels like they've said something and they never have to do anything again, which is also, wrong-headed. And it just comes from our ignorance because we don't know enough to understand what support people need long-term, what we could be offering, and allowing people to say yes or no. Because as you say, some people will want support and they'll need it. Most people will need it. Some of them won't want it. And both of those have to be okay. And we can only understand that if we understand that the timeline is years, not months or days, and that the symptoms are for every part of their body, that their digestion will be off, and their sleep and their appetite and their immune system and their muscles and everything. And their brain doesn't work right.
Right. Oh, yes.
And yet we're expecting people to show up at work like nothing happened. So even this poor grandparent who had this devastating thing happen and didn't want everyone bombarding her with condolences probably could have used some real practical support around time, for example, that most of us completely lose our connection to time. So a reminder of when meetings are going to be, for example, a reminder to take a lunch break, all of those things related to time. And you don't have to say, oh, because your grandchild died, I'm reminding you it's lunchtime. We could just be caring humans that are looking out for each other and understand that, when our brain is reprogramming itself and protecting us from the horrifying reality, that we need support. And the only way we can get there is through conversation and through asking the questions and saying, what do you think? And if you can't predict it, that's okay. Let's have a conversation Monday at lunch and see how it's going. Let's meet every Monday at lunch for the next however long.
Understanding all the factors that you listed about grief is so important because our brains get so scrambled on purpose to protect us, as you said, that sometimes you're so inattentive it's really not safe to drive. I used to do co-counseling with a pastor, and lots of times around grief and hospice care, etc. And he went to, I think, Ohio because his wife's father had died. They were very, very close. It was like his father. So he got there, and being the pastor, he's trying to help everybody and do all this stuff. And he says, I'm going to take a little trip over here to my favorite donut shop, and I'll bring us back some donuts. And he gets up to the window, and the woman said, what donut do you like? And he could not think what donut that was. And he said, then I really began to realize all the permutations that grief has in our lives.
Yeah. And that's so normal. What do you like is a really hard question because you don't know anymore. Because and especially, you're at the donut shop in the town where the father figure was. So this is all entangled with the loss. He might have been able to answer that at a donut shop at home. Right? Because it's not so entangled with the loss.
Yes.
But yeah, it's so fascinating what our brain is really doing. And even if we don't want to nerd out on all the cool new science.
Oh, I love to nerd out. I just love it.
There's so much cool new science where they're studying grieving brains and actually seeing what's happening to them and what they're doing. What we can understand just as fellow humans and employers or coworkers or friends or family or whatever is that person's brain is basically now made of mashed potatoes.
Yes.
And we don't need to understand the science that it's, neuroplasticity is working and it's reprogramming itself and it's partly attached to all of the mapping that we do as infants and how we always know. We don't need to know all the nerdy stuff. What we need to understand is that when that person is confused, it's real. I was listening in on a conversation that happened at work not that long ago, and someone was talking about their sister whose husband had died, and she had flown to wherever they were for the service, the weekend of the service, and got there on Friday. The service is on Saturday, and her sister didn't have a dress yet. And this person was appalled. Like, how could she not have got it together to go to the mall and get a dress and blah, blah. And I just thought, oh, because she could get out of bed in the morning and put on some sweatpants, get to the mall. Think of all the steps that is, right? And that's the other thing to understand. For the grieving brain, multiple steps is overwhelming and impossible. So you have to get up, get dressed, get to the car, drive yourself to the mall, be pleasant in public, which is really hard. Find something. You have to take your clothes off and put clothes on multiple times. Then you have to make a decision about the dress. Then you have to go pay someone and be nice to the clerk. And then you have to get back in the car and you have to go back home. And oh my goodness. No wonder she didn't have a dress. Like,
so
it was
many
no
steps.
surprise to me that the thing that had fallen through the cracks was that she didn't have a dress.
Yes.
But her
So
sister, who was
surprising.
there to support her, was like, how could you not have a dress? Like, that's the most basic thing. And I was like, oh, that's really not. Like, she's managed to hold it together, find the place, book the pastor or whatever they were going to have, plan the service, have the little programmy things, find a book of remembrance. Like, she had done a lot of stuff. And the thing she needed, no big surprise, fell to the back and never got done. But it's that sense of we just need to understand whatever weird thing they're saying, it's okay. Whatever strange decision they've made that seems out of character, it's okay. Whatever thing they used to do without even thinking that now they're struggling with, it's okay. Grief is the answer.
Yes. And even when it's like really somebody you're really close to, if you don't have the information that you're giving us this morning, if you don't have that in the back of your head and saying, oh, okay, I heard this. I heard that, yes, I really need to help with little tiny baby steps. Like, can I get you a cup of coffee?
Yeah. Or tea. You might give an either or. Is it this or that? Because we can do that, right? Either or is okay. Yes, no is okay. Open-ended. Anything you need, let me know. And if you think about it, what's so fascinating is that's the offer we make because that feels the most generous.
It does, but to the person receiving, it's like mush.
Yeah, I can't do anything with that. I literally can do nothing with it because if I don't need something right now, by the time I need something, I will have forgotten who even made that offer. And then, in my experience, I had people get mad at me because I wasn't letting them help me. And I finally, one of my cousins was so mad at me. She said, I offer to help you all the time. And I'm really worried about you because you're not accepting help. And I said to her, no. I know I need help and I am accepting help every time I'm able to. But if I don't need something at that moment that you offer, I can't. Later is not a thing my brain will do. So I said,
there is no later.
There is no later. I can only do right now. I might be able to do a minute and a half from now. Right. And that eventually gets longer over time and hard work and effort and grieving. But she hadn't understood that I was very willing to accept help, but I couldn't accept it in the way she was offering.
Yes.
But if you said to me, oh, do you need bread or milk? I could say, oh, milk or both or whatever. But we need those specific offers. So specific. It has to be like, it comes down to yes or no.
And we always use that phrase, just take this one day, just take this day at a time. No, it's not that. It's 5 minutes. It's 2 minutes at a time. It's the time gets so confused and distorted that we can only just think ahead, maybe 2 minutes. Maybe when we hear the dog scratching at the door, we know, okay, I've got to get up and let them out now. That's about all they got.
That's it. And most of us want to be at work and want to be interacting with people, but we're interacting from this place of literally having mush and doing the best we can. And so how do we, as supporters, invite people into those spaces? How do we do some of that labor? Because the griever, it's an inhuman ask for us to expect them to come to a gathering or come to the workplace or come to anywhere and have to advocate for what they need. So we need to get better as supporters to be saying, I understand that it might be really hard to get together in big groups of people. And we would love for you to be at this birthday party. Yeah, birthdays are really hard. That's a bad example. We would love for you to be at this luncheon. And so please know that you can change your mind on the day and cancel and no one will mind. And if you manage to come, you have a get out of jail free card and you just get to say, I'm going now and walk away or just walk away. But we would love to see you for whatever you're able to do. So that's so different than the griever thinking, oh my gosh, I really want to go. But if I say yes and I have to change my mind, I'll disappoint them. If I say no, I'm disappointing them now. All I do is disappoint people. And then you're down that whole path All we need is permission for it to be messy and awkward and
Yeah.
uncertain. And when we have that, it's so much easier to slowly reintegrate. It's so much easier to reconnect with people from this place of devastation that it feels like nobody understands or cares about.
Yes, the lady who lost her granddaughter, it took about 6 weeks before they entertained the idea of having a memorial at the place of work. Because there were lots of people grieving over this little child, because this little child had come to the hospital with the nurse quite often.
Yeah.
And they all knew him. And he was like one of those children that you look at and you don't say, oh, that's nice, he's cute. No, you looked at this kid and you really saw him. He was super special.
Yeah.
So everyone who touched his little life was just their strings of connection were hurting so bad.
Yeah.
That they needed a whole grief process for everyone who had touched this little life.
Yeah. And most workplaces are completely ill-equipped to do anything like that with any kind of, well, I was going to say with any kind of ease. That's way too far down the path from where we're at. With any kind of not awkwardness, with any kind of grace, really, because it's so awkward and it's such a hard conversation. And, in those collective grief moments, there's such an ability to change lives and to transform relationships. Because when you allow everyone permission and for it to be okay to be grieving at work, to be grieving together, to have this shared experience, which, yes, it's going to be different for the grandparent than for the person who saw them once, for the person who worked in the grandmother's department and saw them all the time. It's going to be different for everybody. And it's still a shared experience. And when we can build safety and connection around those shared experiences, that's when we really start to change culture. That's when we really start to shift that paradigm around grief being something that isn't welcome and is too scary and we don't want to deal with. Because then we're putting the onus back on the grievers again.
The paradigm shift does not just include grief.
No.
Once you make that level of commitment and interaction with another heart-to-heart kind of conversation, it forever changes the way you feel about that person. So 10 years from now, you're still changed.
Yeah. And it really changes the culture of whatever community it is. So if it's a group of friends or a church group or a community group or the pickleball club or a workplace, whatever it is, when we give permission for those big emotions to be allowed and expressed and shared, we're really giving permission for people to show up as they are. And that's our craving as humans, right? Is to show up as fully as we are, as who we are, and be seen and accepted. And a big part of that has to do with our emotional life, which, certainly for my generation, back in the day, I remember being at a workshop where they talked about writing down all the things you were feeling and leaving it outside the door of the office before you came in. Like that was the expectation, was you just left all that, you left your troubles outside the door. It was inhuman, but we didn't know any better.
That's what we call robots.
Right? Now, we're starting to know better, but there's a skill gap. So we know what we want and we can talk all we want about people being seen, heard, and valued. But unless we allow the messy parts and the painful parts to be seen, heard, and valued as much as the celebrations and the joy and the accomplishment, we're not really there yet.
It's so powerful when people who are bosses or different levels of being in leadership, when they understand these premises that we're talking about today, they can fully make coming to work so much better for everybody. And the people who come to work feel like they're cared for. And when you have a culture of being cared for, when you think that the person above you and above you and above you really cares about what you're thinking, feeling, doing, oh, it just, you never want to leave. You want to be in this supportive, nurturing environment so you can just be you and also use your zone of genius to help the company.
Yes. And those companies are the ones that are thriving.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The statistics, and I won't quote them all because we'd be here till tomorrow, but the Harvard Business School, all the places that are studying
Mm-hmm.
workplaces and productivity and all of the things that make a company successful, it's these kind of environments,
Mm-hmm.
right? We want our employees to be our best recruiters. We want them to stay. We want them to know we care about them.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't just care about them when everything's going great. We care about them when the chips are down too. We care about them when they're stumbling. We care about them when they're struggling. And what's fascinating to me about grief, and why I, kind of jokingly, but not jokingly say, grief is the answer, is that grief is a place where it happens collectively enough
Mm-hmm.
that we have opportunities to have this shared experience. And it's something that is happening all the time, right? At any given time, it's about 1 in 5 people that are grieving the loss of a loved one. That's 20% of your staff, 20% of your whatever community. And that's just the loss of a loved one. So you add people who are grieving what's happening in the environment or the economy or in the wars that are going on around the world or in their personal life because they just lost a pet or a business or a home or a car or a whatever. We're grieving all of those losses. So grief really is this rich place that we're in all the time, that we're not using for the transformational potential that it holds or for the potential for connection that it holds. Because if we can show up from the heart and operating from that place of really wanting to understand another person in this experience that we all have all the time, but we're not talking about, we can shift so much. But we have to do it even though we're scared. And we have to do it even though we're unskilled. And we have to do it even though we're not going to get it right every time. Because that's what happens when we're learning a new skill, right? It's new skills that we need to learn.
Yes.
And so
we learn.
And we're going to make mistakes.
We practice.
And,
yes. And through the practice.
And I was going to say, what happens when we practice on the losses that aren't the grandchild, the losses that aren't, for me, my son? What if we practice when a product launch fails, or when our quarterly earnings aren't what we expect, or when, we see someone lose something that's not as much of a rupture as the loss of a loved one? Those are places we can practice those skills. Because someone like me, a grieving mother grieving out loud, I am not a good first assignment. Not a good place to start. I know I was terrified. And that's okay. I had to do what I had to do for me. And what I had to do for me was grieve out loud. I cried all over the place, in coffee shops, in the office, in the car. It didn't matter. I had to be in it. That was the only way for me to survive. But that made me really scary to people that feel unskilled and feel like they don't know enough. So we have to practice. And unfortunately, right now, we're being given immense opportunities to practice. I mean, we look at what's happening even just with weather and people who are losing cars and homes and they don't have power and they don't, never mind what's happening in Los Angeles area and people like whole neighborhoods that don't exist anymore. Never mind what's happening in other parts of the globe where whole neighborhoods don't exist anymore. Like, we're surrounded by loss right now. And we really have been for the last 5 years.
Yes. Yes.
Which is why we have so much fear and so much unrest, because we're all carrying so much unprocessed grief. And we can fix that. It'll be messy and it'll be uncomfortable. And we were not designed to be here to be comfortable anyways. So we might as well get on with it.
I love that you bring that point up, because there is no way that we can learn anything without being uncomfortable. No. In fact, progress demands uncomfortability. And if you're not willing to be messy and uncomfortable, you're not going to get to the next step that you need to get to.
No. And most of us crave that, interestingly. Most of us understand on some, fundamental cellular level that we're here to improve, and we're here to grow, and we're here to figure out who we are and how we carry ourselves in this world. And somewhere along the way, we got told that we're supposed to be comfortable and it's supposed to be easy.
Yeah, we don't want to be scared. We don't like being scared.
No, but that's not it. We got lied to. Like, that was a lie. Like, this comfortable, easy. I don't think that's what we're meant for. And there's moments that are more comfortable, and there's moments that are more easy. And it's not all a struggle, but a lot of it's uncomfortable, if we're being honest.
Yeah, we're actually meant for disruption.
Yeah.
And the more we can be our personal disruptors in a kind way in our environment, because if you see the status quo and it's not working and you know how to fix it, and you don't take that opportunity, then you are really, really being selfish with what you have to give.
Yeah. And we're not reaching our potential. So many of us have so much more potential for connection and for love and for excitement and pain and sorrow. And it's all a both and. But we get fed this story about comfort. We get fed this story about good emotions and bad emotions that we should ignore, or positive, negative, however you want to frame them. And not just that, we're feeling beings. We're so focused on being thinking beings that we forget that we're feeling beings until we have a massive grief and our brain turns to mashed potatoes and all we have left are feelings. And holy man, is that uncomfortable? Because we haven't practiced.
Because all these things do live in our body.
Yeah.
I talk to people all the time who've been chronically ill for years. And there was an origin to that chronicity if we go backwards. And we find it. And just gently prod what that possibly could have been. And then they start to feel a little bit better over time as they kind of release that peace. I work with people all over the world who are empathic, who are intuitive, who really can channel those kinds of things into a place where the person has them, can understand that it's not like, we're not doing woo-woo stuff here. We're doing physics on a physical level of what happens to us bioenergetically when we have a trauma. And we don't recognize it, and we try to put it in that little box in the closet.
Yeah. No good ever came out of putting stuff in a box in a closet. In real life or in our emotional world. And for me, that's part of why I made that decision. I thought, as a grieving parent, as a grieving mother, I knew, it's another both and. I knew how dumb and ridiculous that whole kind of hierarchy of like grief's worth grieving or worthy of grief were. And I also knew that as someone who had landed at the pinnacle of that I would be given a lot of grace to grieve out loud. And I remember thinking, what the only way for me to survive this will be to allow all of the emotions. I can't stuff any of them because that will be a malignancy in my body. And I knew that was not my path. And I knew that there was also no win in delaying because I had permission, which we usually don't get permission to grieve, but somehow as a grieving parent, you get permission. And I remember thinking, like, I have permission. I need to do this now while I still have permission. And I will continue to demand permission because I'm now, 4 and a bit years out. I still need permission because I'm still grieving. And newsflash, I will be grieving forever.
Yes.
And I'm okay with that. It doesn't look the same every day. It doesn't look the same as it did a year ago or 2 years ago or 3 years ago or 4 years ago. And having that permission meant that I could be crying in the coffee shop. Someone could ask me a question. And I remember one poor coworker, I don't say poor because he was well equipped to deal with it, but he asked me a question about my car. You would think that would be a safe topic. We're in a coffee shop in a public place, and he asked me a question about my car. And he had asked me, it was one of those SUVs that had the fold up very back seat. And he asked me about that back seat and whether I found it useful or not. And I burst into tears in the coffee shop. And he, was of course taken aback at the moment. But then he was well skilled to allow me to have this conversation. And I was in a place where I would just cry and have the conversation at the same time, because there was no compartmentalizing that was going to work. Mm-hmm. And it was such an activator for me, because my son was basically the only person that had ever clambered back to sit in that back seat. Even though we were all adults, he was the most agile and spry among us, and he would be the one that got, shoved into the back. So to ask about that back seat immediately brought that to mind, and of course created a griefy moment. Mm-hmm. And that's
put together.
Yeah. And so we had a tearful conversation about the third back seat in an SUV in a coffee shop, because that's how grief works. And because he was able to be okay with that, I got to process and release some more of my trauma and my pain and my grief. And that's what keeps us healthy and moving and in motion in these circumstances. But had he been sort of among the majority of us who would have immediately shut down and turned his back on me, which other people did in other circumstances.
Yes.
I wouldn't have had that moment.
I'm so sorry I brought that up.
I didn't want to make you sad. I hear that all the time. I don't want to say anything because I don't want to remind them, and I don't want to make them sad. Mm-hmm. So, there's the camera. So first of all, you are not powerful enough to make anybody anything.
Right.
So put your ego aside, because you don't have that power. Mm-hmm. And second of all, you're not reminding us, because we didn't forget.
We're sad all the time.
I will never forget, right? That my dad died, that my mom died, that my son died, that many other people have died. I will never forget. You are not reminding me. And knowing that you also remember, especially around hard days, the anniversary,
Christmas,
the birthdays, Christmas, Mother's Day, Father's Day, whatever day is attached to that person, to send someone a message or give them a call or say to them in the hall, I'm thinking about you right now. And I was remembering, thinking about this scenario with the grandmother and the grandchild. I was just remembering I don't know what their name was, the other day, and thinking how much I loved when they would come with their big, huge smile and that joyful energy. That might make that grandmother cry. That's okay. Tears are healthy. And the connection that builds, because she now knows that person gets at least a little bit of what she's going through and wants to acknowledge it and see it. That's the part that we need. And we're only going to get there if we're going to allow people to cry, if we're going to allow people to feel, if we're going to allow people to be messy. And it's so worth it.
It's so worth it, because it says, I care about you.
Yes. Yeah. And I remember, I just, before we started recording, was on a call with a client, and the anniversary of their husband's passing was last weekend. And almost nobody said anything. And it was the first anniversary. And almost nobody said anything. And that was devastating to them. Because on those anniversaries, that person is all we can think of. And that the world just goes on like nothing happened creates this cognitive dissonance that is almost impossible. So say something. I know, I am 100% sure there were people on that day that were thinking about her and thinking about him, but they didn't say anything. So she's left feeling alone. And that is the one power we do have. We can leave people alone. But we have that power of connection, and it's so much better. And it can be a text message. If you're not comfortable with the big messy emotions, just a text, thinking of you today, thinking about your loved one, remembering that this is the day they died. I don't care what you say. Say something that's you from your heart. But say something. Don't let it go by without saying anything.
Yes. Fortunately, I'm out in the country, and I hate to cry. I don't like the way it makes my eyes feel, my throat. I really don't like it. But I do like to scream.
Yeah.
So if I lose a pet, 13, 14-year-old pet, if I have to take that pet, I used to raise Great Pyrenees, and they were as big as me. If I had to take that pet to the vet, because the vet would know, and I would know when I showed up with an animal that I had done every possible thing to keep it going, but now we had reached the decline to the level that it was ready to say, please help me. Please help me get out of this body. And the vet would, he also raised Great Pyrenees, so we had this affinity with them as being big, as almost as big as us, and having to do something to them that was going to take them off. So usually I would leave the dog in the car. He would have no desire to stand up, couldn't get out of the car if he wanted to, all those things.
Mm-hmm.
And it was sort of a ritual. He stayed in the car. The vet would come out with his syringes. We would do just a little light sedative.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a relaxation kind of going on. And I would sit there and talk. And I would tell them what a good dog they were.
Yeah.
And then he would do his thing. Mm-hmm. It would be very gentle. And one moment they were there, and the next minute they were gone.
Yeah.
And after I finished my thing with paying for the service and stuff, and I would be driving screaming.
Yeah.
Just screaming, first of all, that I had to come and do this thing.
Mm-hmm.
But that pet that was my companion and my friend for 16 years had to go. And so those are the kind of experiences that people have all the time.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's easier to be really, 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 really in it right at the beginning, rather than saying, oh, I've got to hold this together. I can't go there.
Yeah. And I think it's so important for people to hear that, like, crying is not the only answer.
Mm-hmm.
I was a crier. That worked for me. I could sob and cry and release it that way. You want to scream? Great. Do that. It was interesting. In one of my grief cafes a few months ago, I was talking about smash rooms. And nobody that was on the call that day had heard of a smash room. And I was like, okay, well, everybody's homework as soon as you get off is to Google, like, where is your local smash room? Because if you can go and get it out physically also, that can be really helpful for people. Like, if you can move your body, even in a way that is destructive, especially I think in a way that is destructive because it's so satisfying,
it is.
We need to keep all of that emotion moving, like literally moving. Mm-hmm. Because when we say to ourselves things like, or other people say things to us and we let them land and we don't just let them fall away, like, you have to hold it together until, you have to hold it together unless, you have to hold it together for, we are telling our bodies that it's not okay to do what they need to do. Mm-hmm. And that's never going to work long term, right? Grief is patient. It will wait for us.
It will be heard.
Yes.
It will be heard no matter what.
No matter what you think, you cannot control it. It will come. And for so many people, it ends up coming years and years later, right? You'll have another loss and that grief train pulls in. I love the idea of the grief train, right? We want to keep our grief train as short as possible. We want to grieve every time something happens. So it's not just attaching another car to the train, because that grief train will pull in. And if it's long, that's where we get the disproportionate response to a loss. And then people are looking at you going, why are you reacting like that? This was not that big of a deal. But it's because your grief train is bringing all the grief that you haven't dealt with yet back to the front. So the more we can do it in the moment, the more we can do it when it happens, when that griefy moment comes. And I just say, like, if I have a griefy moment and I'm around other people, I'll just say, oh, it's just a griefy moment. Like, there's no need to stop the conversation. There's no need to cancel the outing. There's no need for anything. I just get to have my griefy moment and then we go on. Because they happen, and they happen forever, for years and decades and ages. Yes. And that's actually how it's supposed to work. It's not supposed to be over. We're not supposed to have moved on. All of that stuff that we say and we've been taught it's all lies and falsehoods.
It's all lies, definitely.
It's all fear, right? What it is fear. We're scared of death. We're scared of grief. And we pretend that if we ignore it, it's not real.
See, that's why I like the model of awake.
Yeah.
excuse me, we all come together. The person is there. You can go over and touch them, say things to them. Um, cry your heart out. You're around other people who are like just enjoying the conversation of when they had the really fun time with Joe. Oh, Joe and I did this. We were about 10 years old, and you have that conversation, and the other people have never heard it, and it's very bonding and satisfying to them. And everybody has a good time. We eat together. Sometimes people get a little inebriated, which we make sure they don't drive. We do all these things, and it's very, very mushy and messy. But when people go home the next day and they wake up and they say, "Oh, that was so good. We got to really hear more about this person." My brother is 12 years younger than me. So when one of my parents died, I was way off in another state. He was right there. He got to help plan the funeral with his wife, etc. So when I flew in to the funeral, to the final goodbye, and I spoke at the funeral, it was a very different picture for me than him, because he had lived this with our mom through hospice, etc., etc., etc. And so when we got together later at his house, we exchanged all these stories, because he had so many stories after I left for college. He had so many stories about what happened when he was like much younger and a kid. And it was just so satisfying to hear them, to expand my life with this person that I love so much.
Yeah. And I love that you bring that up. And I love that idea of the wake, that whole sort of reception, whatever has happened after the celebration of life or the service. And what's so fascinating to me is we all enjoy that so much. We don't enjoy that we're having it because the person has died, but we're enjoying sharing those memories, learning more about them, feeling more connected to them. And then somehow we think when that event is over, we're not supposed to do that anymore. When the reality is, we could be sharing those stories forever. And how comforting that is to the person who's the closest to the loss.
Yes.
Right? I love when someone messages me and says, "Oh my gosh, I was thinking of Ben the other day and this funny thing we did," especially his friends, because they, as you say, they have a whole bunch of stories about him that I don't know because I wasn't there. And then I can share stories about him back, and they're learning a little bit more about him too. But we can be doing this long term. We can create rituals where on their birthday, on a special occasion, on a whatever it is, we bring them with us by sharing those stories, by making new ways to have them present, and not by pretending that that's supposed to be done and we're supposed to be finished with all that. Like, none of us want to leave our person behind. None of us want to move on or get over them, or, all of those cliches kind of have that subtext of like, they're back there somewhere and I'm moving on. No, I'm moving with.
Yes.
So how do we bring these people and these experiences, these other losses, how do we bring them with us and honor them through the amazing life we're living, honor them through what we're creating, what we're doing, the transformations we're having? Because I say to people all the time, grief will change you. You will be changed. So you can either do that intentionally and embrace the transformational potential, or it will just happen to you. And most of us don't want to be in that happen to you place. We want to have some agency, and we want to be making decisions. And we're making decisions all day, every day. We just don't have awareness of them so much. And when your whole world feels like it has fallen apart, as it did for me, and you're looking around at this post-apocalyptic nightmare while the rest of the world is moving on like they're on a search without you, you have to build something. So what if you did it on purpose? Yes. And it's not, I love that you said we're just doing baby steps. There's no leaping in grief. We're not jumping the Grand Canyon. We're trying to get this far ahead. It's a baby step, a baby step, a baby step. But a whole link of baby steps takes you anywhere you want to go.
Yes, yes. And I had a client who was so close to her father. He was never going to die
Yeah.
in her mind.
Mm-hmm.
That no, he'll be forever here for me. And so, unfortunately, he found out he had a stage 4 type of cancer,
Mm.
and he was in the hospital. They had very little time with him, like maybe 2 months after that.
Yeah.
And when we were having our conversations, we were doing telehealth. She'd be in her car, and we'd be talking, and she says, "I just don't know how to honor him in my life because he
Mm.
was such a big part of it."
Mm-hmm.
And everybody around me knows that he was such a big part of it. They also had the contact with him too. Her children, her husband, they were all close.
Mm-hmm.
I said, "Well, why don't you make a little memorial in your house?"
Mm-hmm.
A lot of other cultures do this all the
Yep.
time.
Yep.
And when we do it, we say, "Oh, that's so weird."
Yeah.
But when you make a memorial in your house, like a picture that really speaks to you of the person,
Mm-hmm.
some some flowers, they don't have to be alive. You can even put fake flowers there because the person gone doesn't care.
Yeah.
Maybe you put a favorite fruit, an apple or a tangerine or something they really, really enjoyed, or some little piece of them.
Mm-hmm.
And you see the memorial, and every day you go by and you talk to dad.
Yeah.
And that's and you talk to him about, "I really hate it that you left. I'm still really mad. I
Yeah.
need you now, and you're
Yeah.
gone." So you have these ongoing conversations with dad, even though he's passed on.
Yeah.
And people say, "Oh, that is so weird." But after you set one up, and I hope that you never have to,
Yeah.
because you've lost someone that you love. But when you set one up with intention, and you have other people in the family to bring their little gifts of
Mm-hmm.
intention.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing in grief is that sometimes spouses, particularly, want to get rid of everything that reminds them
Yeah.
of the person because they're so, every time they see that shirt, they burst into tears. Children want to keep pieces of their father.
Mm-hmm.
So let them come. Let them look through all the things. Let them get that favorite shirt that smells like him,
Yeah.
and take it home. I don't know if this company still exists, but there was a company that if you would send 2 or 3, sheets or something, or shirts
Mm-hmm.
or whatever, put them in a bag, send them to this company, they would create an essence smell of the person.
Oh, that's cool.
It's amazing, isn't it?
I want that.
Yeah.
That's very
And,
cool.
and then they would send it back to you, and you could put it on something like your pillow at night,
Yeah.
and you could have that smell. And it dissipated over time, of course, because that's the
Yeah.
nature of the beast.
Yeah.
But that initial smell of that person is there, and they're still there with you.
Yeah. And I think there's so much to be said for creating rituals,
Mm-hmm.
right? Whether it's having an altar or a memorial place or whatever you're comfortable calling it, where, as you say, you have little offerings or little mementos or whatever it is to remind you of the person, and that's kind of your touchstone place.
Mm-hmm.
Having rituals is so helpful too, and doing things with intention. Like, we have so much ability to do things on purpose, and
Mm-hmm.
when my dad died, my daughter she had just turned 4, because they almost shared a birthday, and she just had, well, he had his birthday, he died the next day, and her birthday was the day after that. So she had just turned 4, and she was super close to her grandpa. And we went that first Christmas without him. She and my mom and I went to a candlelight memorial service down at the waterfront. It was beautiful. This big, huge tree that was decorated, and we all made ornaments and hung them for all our people. It was beautiful. And we all had those little church choir candles, the skinny ones with the white paper around them.
Mm-hmm.
And we took those home, and that became the grandpa candle. And every time we had, special occasions or dinners or birthdays or whatever, we would light the grandpa candle. And eventually, of course, we burned through all of those candles. And my mom, bless her heart, we love this ritual so much. She found other little skinny candles and little skinny candle holders. And for years and years and years, we lit the grandpa candle. And I remember, because my kids are 3.5 years apart. So my daughter was 4. My son he was born in April. My dad died in September. So he was however many months that is. And I remember my daughter telling him about why we were lighting this candle. Because my son didn't remember my grandpa, didn't remember his grandpa because he was an infant. So he had pictures, but that was it. Didn't know him. So my daughter would share her stories and be like, oh, we're lighting this candle because it's for grandpa, and grandpa died, and tell the whole story and share what she remembered of him as a 4-year-old. And she's 30 now. And not that long ago, we were doing some cleaning of like the hutch in the dining room. And we got rid of a whole bunch of candles. And then at the back of one of the drawers was a grandpa candle. And she was like, well, we can't get rid of the grandpa candles. Like,
oh no, we can't.
26 years later, and we're still like, oh yeah, like we got to keep those grandpa candles. And I don't know if we'll ever light them, and it doesn't matter. We know they're there. One of them is, I think, one of the original church candles, because it's like that church choir white skinny candle with the paper around it. I don't know how we ended up with one of those still. And the others are the ones that my mom eventually bought over time, and the little holders were there. And I just thought, no, like that matters. To do those rituals matter, you know. And so often we avoid places that are important to us with our person, and that's fine. If that feels good to you, do that. For us, for my daughter and I, we knew there were places that we wanted to know if we still wanted to be able to go there, if we still liked them without them being with us. So we would intentionally go and I ended up calling them our revisit and reclaim trips.
Oh, yes.
And we would go somewhere to revisit it and remember all of the amazing times we had there with him. And then to think about, like, how does it fit in our life now? Is it only important to us because he loved it? Or is it something that we have also come to love? Is it something we all love together? So that's why it became so important. And when you do that intentionally, yes, tons of emotions, lots of tears on those adventures. And such an amazing way to remember the stories, to think of the times, and to make a choice about, you know, this place is really important to us and we still really love it. So how do we do it now? That's when he's not there.
Yes.
It's that intentionality that makes such a difference.
Yes. I lived in Hawaii for about 20 years, and there's a very large Buddhist community there. And once a year, regardless of whether you're Buddhist or not, they have it's sort of like an ancestor celebration. And the priest comes and you sit inside their little church, and they talk about the ones that have gone on. And there'll always be people who have flown in from other places just to do this one thing. And so you get your lantern that's made out of paper and it has a candle in it. And we're right next to the ocean. And so, and it's usually after sunset. We're there when the sun sets, and we're sending our person off into the sunset in a ritual that is so empowering to see all these different ethnicities from all over the world come and take their person lantern. And I always get a person lantern. It might not be a person I know, but they give me one too. And so we set them gently on the little lapping waves, and which to me is very much like grief. Grief comes to you in little waves. Sometimes it comes to you in big waves.
Yeah.
So we set it on the ocean, and we just watch them. Hundreds of beautiful lanterns just go way out as far as we can see, and eventually they're gone.
Yeah.
And it's just so powerful that we as a community did this. The community sharing of grief is so healing and powerful.
Yeah. And that sense that you're not alone. You are not the only person with a lantern, which means that what's happening to you is you're not alone. You're not the only one. It's not weird, you know, because everyone else is there having similar feelings and a similar experience. And I think that to me is the power of that, you know, whether it's collective grief where we're all mourning the same thing, or it's that we're all grieving and we come together in our different griefs. that community is so powerful. And, grief is so similar and different every time. It's one of those things that has, yes, some symptoms and a timeline you can kind of sort of expect, but it's going to be different every time. Mm-hmm. And the only universal is it needs to be witnessed.
Yes.
It needs to be witnessed. We need people that can just sit with us or can be in this kind of shared experiencing where we're all witnessing each other. The grievers are witnessing the grievers. The people who don't have a specific person are still coming to get a lantern to say, it's okay. I see you. I understand. That's the magic. That's what makes a difference. The telling people to get over it, the telling them they should be happy, the telling them they can get another one. None of that is helping. So we need to stop it and we need to try something different. And what we need is that shared experience. Whether you have ever grieved or not, you can sit with someone who's sad. You don't have to have done it. Yeah. You don't have to understand it. You can understand
you don't have to that. Say a word about it.
You don't have to say anything. We don't need you to fix it. It's not fixable. We're not broken. We're just having a human experience. And you need to witness it.
It brings up a lot of what you talked about. We're all grieving on some level for all these different things that happen. And I think about a very, very hard subject, people coming back out of Gaza who've been there for 14 months. The bodies of the people who were killed are still there. The grieving mom who's lost her kid will never, ever really be able to grieve until that body comes forth. And they can treasure it and do whatever ritual they're going to do with it.
Yeah.
So, yes, these people have appeared. I always think as a psychologist, how are they ever going to really live? Because, they were happy before. They were enjoying life so much. And to have this experience and then be the person they are now is so, so different. And thank goodness there are grief counselors. There's people who support them. All the rabbis, everybody there is there to support them. It's a national grief. And
and something similar has happened on the other side too, which I think makes it so complicated.
Yes.
Because it's an impossibly complicated conflict, which I will never understand. And I just have to accept that. But what I can understand is that what's happened is that on both sides, there are unspeakable losses that feel unsurvivable.
Yes.
And yet we survive. And yet, people have to remake their communities and remake their life and reimagine what might be different, but still possible. And, that idea of being a parent who never has a body and that happens in so many circumstances. You think of all the, air crashes or fires or earthquakes, other natural disasters and unnatural disasters. And that sense of not being able to have that closure, then we need to find ways to have closure without that physical.
Yeah, we need the rituals then.
We need the rituals. That's where they step up to hold us. And so many cultures have amazing rituals. The Western non-religious culture is not one of them. But, so many cultures do, and religious practices do have those rituals embedded in them. And how can we learn from those and adapt them and, find ways to see each other as fellow humans having this experience, living these unspeakable losses in this time where the whole world feels unsettled and worrisome and we're not sure what's coming next, whatever part of any political argument or religious divide or ethnic divide or whatever. We're seeing it happen all around the world right now, where as humans, we're not being very kind to each other. And we're taking out our fear and our worry on each other in really awful ways that are, when we look back, we have nothing to be proud of. And the difference we can make is in how we meet those people who are struggling and how we see them and how we allow them to have their big, messy emotions, whether we agree with them or not. Mm-hmm. Those emotions are a thing. And to just witness those big, messy emotions and allow them to say what they have to say without feeling like we need to step in and correct them or fix them or have an argument about what they might believe. Ultimately, it's not that important.
No.
What's important is that my heart sees your heart. You know, as a grieving parent, there's times I have to turn away and not pay attention and not listen to the news because I know what those parents are experiencing. I know a version of it, and it's devastating. And when you think of the scale of it in so many circumstances, whether it's war or mass shootings or school shootings or natural disasters, that loss of life out of order or in order or of old people or of young people or anybody, it overwhelms our system. And that's even more reason for us to reach out and witness and be full-hearted in the way that we show up for people. Whether it's our coworkers, our employees, our community members, our pickleball player friend, our bridge player, whatever it is, I don't care. We have to find our shared humanity or we're going to be in this mess for who knows how much longer.
Yes. And I've worked in nursing homes for about 20 years. Now I just do some assessments, like, you know, a couple of times a week because I enjoy this so much more. And so I would tell people and like joke with them. I said, don't ever die on Christmas. I'm going to tell you right now, don't do it. And they'll just laugh like, oh, that's so funny. That's so silly. I'd say, no, because if you do, every Christmas in the whole world for these people will be contaminated with this grief.
Yeah.
So sometimes I usually get to see clients for about a year. And over that year's time, we develop a really good bond. They see me as like an altar family member. And I get to hear the things that they don't want their family to hear.
Right.
So sometimes it's a childhood thing. Sometimes it's something that happened with their spouse who's long gone. But I'm the repository of all their personal things they need to hear. Again, I'm witnessing. I'm just there to witness what they're saying and feeling. And then the time comes when the clock starts to wind down, and you can see it, very physical kind of things. The clock starts to wind down, and then the family who hasn't visited them in 4 months shows up.
Yeah.
And they don't know what to do. And the person's there. They're still sort of semi-conscious. And I always invite the family members. We have chairs for them. Sit with your person. Hold your hand. Say anything you want to, even if you're mad. Say anything you want to, because they're going to hear you. They're still here. They're going to hear you. I remember going to a room, and the person that I had known for quite a while, she was close. She was about 4 hours from, we call it transitioning, when we're just going from a different plane to another. All the family members are there. They were all standing. And they were just as quiet as mice. They weren't talking or saying anything. They weren't sitting down. They were thinking that
so awkward.
This is like what we're supposed to be doing, right? And so I go over to I call her my person because she's my person too. I go over to my person. I hold her hand. I stroke her arm. I lean over very gently and say some things in her ear. They can't hear me. But what I'm telling her is that she's surrounded by people who really love her, but maybe don't know how to tell her.
Yeah.
But it's okay for her to leave. And I always give them a little kiss on the cheek. And then I step and I invite the family members to please come, hold their hand, thing they want to say.
Yeah.
And there'll be a couple of brave ones who'll
Mm-hmm.
come over. I said, sit on the bed. She's not going to break.
Yeah.
You know, if there's little kids running around, put them up on the bed. Let them see grandma.
Yeah.
And then that sort of breaks the ice for people to share what they feel. And then about an hour later, I'll hear a bunch of crying and I'll go, yes,
Yeah. We got
yes,
them there. Yeah.
we got them to, we got them to let go of that thing that was holding them back.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when
Because
you,
that moment of being able to say goodbye and being able to say, it's so interesting because I had that with my dad
mhm,
and I didn't have it with my mom or with Ben. And it makes such a difference to be able to be there and be able to say and have no regrets because you've
mhm,
said everything. So that piece that people so often carry about wishing they had had the opportunity, we could take in that moment. But the truth is we have that opportunity all the time and we don't take it.
yes,
We have that
yes,
opportunity all the time to tell someone how much we love them, to give them a hug,
mhm,
to make sure they know that we care, to show it in the way that we show up for them, in the way that we treat them.
mhm,
And we don't do it as well as we could.
mhm. And so even years after that, I'd run into that family members and they would look at me and they would like give me such a warm
Mm-hmm.
like connection, even though we haven't had many conversations about other stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
um and I think that that sort of connection happens also within the family too, even when they have a family member who's the black sheep or
Mm-hmm.
hasn't done and hasn't lived up to what we have as expectations.
Yeah.
They're still included in that process. So what I'd like for you to do is, if you can, give us just a couple of tips, a couple of ways of being when someone walks into our life and we know they're grieving. They may be a stranger, they may be a coworker, they may be a cousin. What would you what tool can you give us to help us with this journey?
The most powerful thing for us to understand is that we have it a little bit backwards. We tend to say something really closed off, and we make that
Mm-hmm.
offer that we talked about before where we say, oh, anything you need. We
Mm-hmm.
need to flip those two things the other way around. We need to say something open that invites them to share, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is really open-hearted and probably vulnerable and awkward,
Mm-hmm.
because those old cliches and platitudes are actually doing harm. So
Yes.
we need to just have a ceremonial burning and let them go.
Mm-hmm.
And instead, really just say something open. And if it starts with, I have no idea what to say, that's a very valid place to start.
Mm-hmm.
If it starts with, I'm so sorry, that's an okay place to start, but don't stop there. Because sorry for
Mm-hmm.
what? Who are you to apologize? It's so confusing to grievers when you just say, I'm so sorry, and that's all. So that could be your opening phrase. But then it's about, how are you feeling? How do you want them to feel? Something really open and expansive is what we need to say.
Mm-hmm.
What we need to do is make those specific offers, right? Super specific. Go stand in front of your
Yep.
fridge.
Yeah.
Tell me what's missing.
Yeah.
I'm going to the grocery store and I'll bring it to you. Right? It's that level of
Mm-hmm.
specificity. Do you need milk or cheese or eggs or whatever it might be?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Specific. I can't even say it. It gets me so excited. Right? Tuesday is garbage day. Can I take your cans out too? Right? It's a neighbor. We know these things are happening in our neighborhoods. Help a neighbor.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And you're going to make different offers at work. At work, it might be, we have this big meeting coming up at 2:00. Would it be helpful for me to come and remind you at 1:30 that it's almost time? I know feeding yourself is really hard when you're grieving because it's hard and it's a lot of steps. Could I bring you lunch on Wednesdays?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a recipe I could cook for you? Right? Really specific. Everything you need, they need. So offer what you already like and what you're good at and what you're doing for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Because then you are more likely to follow through and do it. And they are less likely to feel like a burden. Because if you can say, I'm going to the hardware store because I need yard waste bags. Do you need some too?
Mm-hmm.
That's not a burden. They're not asking you to go out of your way for them. You're just offering to do for them what you're doing for yourself. So say something open, offer something specific for a really long time. Like a long, long time, like years. Because especially at those times of year that we can predict will be extra griefy, we need support again. We're right back at the beginning. And we need support again. So I have a friend who reaches out to me, bless her heart, she's been amazing. She reaches out to me every December because she knows December is really hard for me and says, I know December is really hard. Can I send you a food delivery service gift card? Because I just know that you will not feed yourself very well. And she asks me that every December. I know this time that's coming is really hard. Can I do this for you? Yes. And then I get to decide, am I open to receiving? Does that feel uncomfortable? Whatever it is. And if the person says no the first time, keep offering.
Don't stop.
Because that's just no to that item that day. It's not, I never need groceries, right? Or I never need anyone to do anything. So we have to keep offering even when the person says no. Because they don't always have the capacity to ask. They don't have the capacity to imagine what they might need in some day in the future or some moment in the future. But we know what they need because it's what we need. We can see their yard has leaves in it and they might need yard waste bags. And maybe they need a buddy to come and do it with them even. If you love raking leaves, I personally love raking leaves. I don't know why. I've always loved it. Offer what you love to do. Go do that.
This has been, for the person who's listening to this podcast, has probably been things given to them they had never, ever thought of before. So talking about grief, talking about death, talking about all the things that we find extremely messy is so valuable to people. And I love that word griefy. I'm going to start doing that. When I have people come and they've lost somebody, and they're saying, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm crying. I said, you're just having a griefy moment. It's okay. That's what you're supposed to do. In fact, if you're not crying, I'm going to be worried about you.
Yeah. And I say to people all the time, we would never apologize for tears of joy. So why are we apologizing for tears of sorrow? No, we don't need to apologize. You're crying. It just is. And it's okay.
Yes. Now, Suzanne, you have given me ways to get in contact with you that are going to be in these notes. So anyone who wants to have some time with Suzanne, maybe you have a specific question, you have a specific scenario that's happening, maybe it has to do with family dynamics, please look on the show notes and give her a call, because she is just such a valuable resource. And we want to share her to all the people that really need, and don't feel silly making the call or going to the website, because we all need that kind of support in different times. And sometimes it's easier to go to a stranger than it is to call your daughter, because you don't want to burden them. I was like, can I reach into the teleprompter and slap you every time you say that?
But it's true. We have that weird feeling. So yes, reach out. I often say, I wish I didn't know what I know, and I wish people didn't need to hear it, but I do, and they do. So, let this not be for nothing. Let me help.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Suzanne. I just love having you on, and I'm sure in the future there'll be some more things that'll come up, and we really need you. So thank you so much for being with us today. And again, this is Dr. Sally Good at the Good Body, Good Brain podcast. And please like and subscribe so that our podcast can grow and this message gets out to so many, many people. So for today, we're saying goodbye, and thank you so much for being here, and thank you so much for listening.